And welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Friday of our November convening for Ed Prep faculty. My name is Sam Fogelman. I work in educator preparation for the Department of Higher Education. I'm very excited to be with you all today. We have two more presentations to wrap up our week today. This here is, we're going to have members of faculty from Metropolitan State University of Denver talking today to us about laying the groundwork for diversity in teacher education. So Nu, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, welcome.
Sorry, Nu, you're muted there.
Sorry about that. Hi, my name is Dr. Nguyen. I teach in School of Education with my colleagues, Dr. Dorothy Shapland and Dr. Janelle Johnson. We come from the departments of secondary, K-12, ed technology, as well as ECE as well. And so those are the three areas that we represent. We're here to chat about how to lay the groundwork to start initiating and making some changes. And so what I've done is I'd like to share with you at the faculty and program level ways that I have come up with my colleagues and myself to start initiating some of that change. And so you'll see a level 1, 2, and 3. So we'll pay attention to those levels. Okay, can you see slide 1 that says level 1 easy individual? And so what I chose to kind of discuss is what can we do as individuals? I know oftentimes change is hard because when we think about change, we're thinking about it from a large perspective, a global perspective, and from making big changes. But what I would like to share is, you know, in the meantime, what can we do as individuals to start making that change and laying that groundwork to start incorporating whether it's EDI, DEI principles, whether it's laying that groundwork for initiating change so that we've got a diversity coming into our programs or into our faculty and staff within our in our schools. Let's discuss that. The first thing I'd like to chat about is our first impression. Think about what does your first impression have to say about you? And are there ways that you can make that first impression through something simple as your email signature? I didn't share with you my email signature, but if I shared mine, and I'm trying not to share too many examples, but at the bottom of my email signature, what it has is it has a statement from the university about inclusion practices, about Black Lives Matter. It has information about who to contact if you are a student that needs advising, if you're a student that needs other types of student services. So what does that first impression say about you? And what can you do so that initially when a student reaches out to you or a prospective faculty member reaches out to you that might be interested in our university, what can you do without saying anything that has an impression about what you are about and what your program might be about? The second item is your syllabus statement. So one thing that I've added in the last couple semesters is this might be my second impression. It might be my impression on how do I set the tone for my class. And so I'll share an example with you on some things that I have on my syllabus. And this is just a cut and paste right from my syllabus. And you'll see on day 1 here in my personal example in my P 3400 class, you'll see that my introduction is simply and explicitly stated. All are welcome and belong here. I also have that statement at the bottom of my signature line in my email. And I come back to that statement, and the purpose of that very simple statement is that anytime a student, let's say in class, if we're having a difficult conversation about 2 topics that might be very polar, right? I can come back to that very simple statement that's explicit on all my syllabi that says all are welcome and we belong here. That means all diverse statements. That means people from various walks of life. That means people with different perspectives as well. We value your authentic self. And so we have these discussions in class about day 1, about how we want everybody to come to class with their authentic self. We talk about the acknowledgements of history and education. My particular area happens to be physical education and health. And so even within my own topic of my content area, I still find ways to immerse students in conversations from a perspective of a future K-12 physical educator or health teacher as well. And so think about ways that you can do that within your own space and within your own content area. And I think these are some very easy ways that we can do it in a level 1 personal example that we can do within our own spaces, especially our emails and classroom spaces. We talk about that growth mindset and we give space so that students are always learning. And I think that's one challenge that I even have for myself as a professor. You know, I sometimes will internally get frustrated at students that aren't at the same space yet that I'm at, right? But we have to remind ourselves that we have to give students the ability to grow, whether it's over a 2-year span, if they're maybe a post-bac student, a second degree student, or a transfer student, or whether that's a 4-year span. So let's talk about some things that we can do within our classes. I know you can't really see these examples, but what I have in some of these examples in the lab, this is the accompanying lab course. I'm happy to send out, you know, my full syllabi to you to show you how I implement that, even within a PEAT class that has a lab experience. So let me see if I can make this just a little bit bigger for you and zoom in. Zoom is not, my zoom function is not quite working. Can you see that? Can you see that a little bit better? Not yet? Okay, I'll keep zooming in. How about that? That's okay, great, thank you. So this is an example of a field experience class. So you saw my example in my 3400 class, which happens to be a curriculum and instruction class, a theory-based class. This portion is the lab portion. That is the practical application piece. And so as I was thinking about how do I implement some of the EDI principles that I would welcome to not only attract future teachers, but attract maybe faculty members to come teach in my program area. We're in the midst of a search right now. And so as I was thinking about how do we attract diverse candidates and attract diverse students, I thought about how do we do this and show that we have this in action explicitly as well. And here's one way that I choose to do it. And, you know, I call this a level 2 because level 2, it might take you a little bit more time to put some of these things in practice. And so in my level 2, in this lab experience class, what you'll see is I just cut and paste 3 weeks of what we would do in a field experience, in which I don't know if you can see it real well, but I've asked students to really think about, for instance, if we look at week number 3, sorry, let me zoom in a little bit more. If we look at week number 3, for instance, we might have a TED Talk and look at the TED Talk, and then we might talk about what does that single story mean? And I know other classes do this as well. Our multicultural class might have these similar conversations, but I take it from the perspective of a physical educator and a health teacher. How do we have these hard discussions oftentimes, and how do we implement change in a different type of classroom environment? And so what I would challenge you to do is think about the environment that you are in and the context that you teach in. And how do you continue to have those conversations that might have already got started in a class like ours, which is EDS 3130, EDS 3140, and EDS 3150, a foundations class, as well as a multicultural education class that is a standalone class that talks a lot about a lot of this content. How do we use, you know, those roots that we've already laid and continue to talk about that throughout our program? So really that was one thing that really created an impetus for me to continue to think about what can I do and what can my program do in order to embrace and continue these conversations and embed them in everything that we do. And so let me share with you level 3 now. As we move to level 3, this is something that's easy. I put it as level 3, but it does take buy-in from your colleagues within your program as well. And so in level 3, there's an entire list. I know a lot of you come from different universities and you've got different requirements within your universities. But one thing that is common and similar, is that within general studies, students have a very wide range of classes that they can take. So we have decided within our own program, instead of, you know, telling students, oh, go take, you know, 3 credit hours of history, go take 3 credit hours of whatever social sciences. We've instead, when students ask, what should I take for general studies? We've outlined for them how to expand the views. And we've decided to do that from a teacher perspective of opening their lens on what we think a teacher should know and should be able to essentially should strengthen their ability to be a teacher in a diverse setting. And so these are just some things that we've highlighted, and there's a further list as well that is much more extensive than this, but I thought I would just highlight some for you that came off of our general studies list that we thought and we felt that would expand our teachers' views, so that when they come to us after they're done taking their first year or 2 years of general studies, they come to us already with an expanded worldview. And I think that's really important comment to say, because then as they take EDS 3130, 3140, or 3150, or a class like PEAT 3400, they are already moving along that continuum on where we expect them to be as they grow into becoming the teacher that we expect them to be in a multicultural society. So that's some program suggestions. Please let me know at any time if I should slow down. I want to make sure I get to some of these examples so that I save time for my colleagues to share as well. I know you can't see these really well, and it's not meant to go line by line. It's just meant to show examples of what we have done and some things that you can do. So I will just kind of close in on, I will close in on a couple more examples and try to highlight this matrix specifically. So again, in level 3, we have created a matrix of our program. And essentially in this matrix, sorry about that, I did not mean to advance the slide. I'm trying to zoom in on this particular area. I know you still can't see that real well, but it won't let me zoom in any further than that. Sorry about that. Okay, I'm gonna try it one more time. Nope, not allowing me to zoom in any further. Essentially what this matrix has is it has different principles across the top. And again, I'm happy to share this full example with you. It might not make sense necessarily in your program area, but along the left-hand column, it lists all of our courses in our major that are content classes that we have some control over. Across the top, it has different, whether they're EDI, DEI principles, or whether they're TIP, trauma-informed practices, across the top. And so these aren't fully inclusive of all of our course objectives. They're more inclusive of things that we're trying to add, whether they be EDI, DEI principles or TIP principles. They include those areas. And so what we have done is we've added a category for diversity, equity, inclusion, and we have mapped across our program where we implement those explicitly. And so I think that's where our program is heading. Is we do a lot of these things implicitly anyway, and I think great professors and great teachers do those things implicitly, but we're attempting to name those explicitly so that we can make sure that our students have a good depth and breadth of content, especially about these principles throughout the program. So that is a program matrix. We've moved it further to also include program professional dispositions. So as I've highlighted just a couple of these areas, we've got a disposition that is probably about 3 to 4 pages in length. Sorry about that. I'm trying to zoom in and it's not allowing me to zoom in on this. It will allow me to zoom in just a little bit, enough for you to maybe see this area, but you'll see that in some of these areas on our professional dispositions, it will have things like, if you look at that column, exhibits professional ethics and culturally competent practices. And we have developed different areas so that we have incorporated, again, areas around diversity, areas around equity and inclusion, so that students in our program do a self-evaluation of themselves in every single majors class that they have with us. This also follows them through in student teaching as well as in all of their clinical and field experiences. And so that if a student has an issue with another student, they also use this form to evaluate their own peers as well. So not only do they do a self-evaluation, they have an opportunity to do a peer evaluation for positive as well as for corrective feedback as well. And then we use this to do a professor or a mentor teacher evaluation also of the student. So again, our students see this particular form in every single class they have with us. And we have also decided to assign a point value to it so that in every class, your professional dispositions is a minimum of 10% of the student's grade, because we feel like it is so important that they not only have the systematic characteristics of being able to be a teacher, but they have some of those, what we would normally call some of those soft skills as well. And so we have added that in to all of the rubrics that we use. So let me share with you, with that said, an example of a presentation rubric that we use. And I know, again, you can't see this really well, but I just wanted to share with you that these are some ideas that you can build upon, creating your own rubrics, creating your own charts and graphs, and how to implement this more thoroughly within your programs. So I'll just zoom in on one. I just picked one to zoom in on. And this one happens to be care and compassion. And so this is, again, new to us this year. We have decided to include very explicit language on what we want them to be able to perform and what we want to be able to see when they teach. And so this occurs every time they teach. And again, they teach for us in 80% of their coursework in our program. So in every course, we use this rubric on students. And so if you were able to see this full rubric, you would have a rubric that has in bold what they would be able to accomplish and what we expect them to accomplish as 1 to 2,000 level students in those classes. As at 3,000 level courses, we add a little bit more. And so in italics, they have to meet the things that are in bold and then the things that are in italics as well. When they get to the 4,000 level, we have them include everything that's on our rubric. So one example of that is just one area that I picked out that we have added explicitly. We've always asked students to include it, but we have never explicitly had it on a rubric. We've included this. So it demonstrates understanding of students' social emotional needs, safety and predictability, equity and empowerment, dependability, compassion for students, advocates for students, takes action and responds to support students. For example, inclusive and caring classroom environments, communicates with compassion, explicitly condemns bullying or socially inappropriate behavior. That was one that was really important. We believed in our setting, especially as bullying occurs oftentimes, let's say in athletic settings, whether it's in a locker room situation or whether it's in a situation where you see student skills shown at very high levels and very low levels. Attends to students' needs and asks what happened versus what's wrong with that student. I think that one is really important because as we move to looking more internally at what happened to students versus placing blame on what's wrong with that student when they're off task, this is something that we're moving towards in creating a more compassionate environment and a more compassionate teacher and a more compassionate program as well. And then last slide that I want to finish off with is this is a slide that we have done with all of our faculty in our program and that we've expanded to our department as well. And they are just questions really surrounding, oops, sorry about that. They are questions really surrounding what are you going to do to meet this moment? What are you going to do within your own teaching? And I shared with you some of my examples on what I do. What are you going to do for your own professional development? What are you going to do within service, whether it's committees that you serve on? And how do you bring that voice throughout every committee that you serve on? And Dr. Shapland is going to talk more about that and talk about ideas within or across your own department. And then Dr. Johnson is also going to talk about ideas across your own college and across the state as well. So I want you to think broadly also about what can you do to be an agent of change, whether it's individually or within your own program. And then my other two colleagues will talk further about how do we do that at a school level, department level, at the college level and state level. So I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Shapland.
All right. So let me see if I can, if you stop share, then I can share mine. Hopefully. You have to do this way because is that working? All right, I'm just going to share that way because if I put it, otherwise I lose the whole screen and I can't see you. So in just following through the same things that Dr. Hu was talking about, we do start, that level one is really starting with ourselves. So within the School of Education and within departments and programs, we're doing this work. So we have within the School of Education a DEI focus. We have a statement that we've all worked on and agreed upon, and that's a place where we start as far as, you know, at that individual level. And then within each of our committees and task forces, we continue to bring this work forward. So it doesn't become a statement that we have that's sitting out there, but it's something that we take it upon ourselves to always keep that focus in mind, so that even though often in higher education, there are many barriers and situations that arise where the process, the procedures, the policies that are in place to promote higher education really are grounded in an idea of only some people, right? And the elite making it through those programs and preventing others from coming in. And historically, that's where the whole system really was grounded. So in order to constantly interrogate that, to constantly be on top of, but why that policy, but why that procedure, but why that thing, in every one of our committees and task force, we have to charge ourselves to stop and examine doing this because that's the way it's been done, or doing this because that's the best way, or doing this because historically we've always done it. Any of those answers are cause for one of us to step forward and say, wait, let's question that. Why has it always been done that way? And is that the best way? And does that align with our DEI focus? And then again, within the School of Education, moving to a next level, we want to support those teachers that we do have coming in, those teacher candidates that we do have coming into the profession, to make sure that they can continue, that the barriers don't prevent them from completing, that they're able to work and move forward, despite the fact that systematically we have some barriers, and on individual levels, some of us throughout the university are still battling our own biases and our own internal issues. And so we have to defend and protect our students that are there so that they can continue through and they can help us to continue to grow. So we have a diversity scholars program right now that we've just put in place, where students are supported in their program. So they're already in programs, they're already a part of the School of Education, and they get support with some scholarship money to help pay for books, to help them continue. A lot of them are first generation students. They represent a myriad of diversities that they bring to the university. And we support them with advising, intrusive advising, where we're reaching out to students individually and just checking in with them and monitoring how things are going, as well as with ways for them to network. We also have affinity social groups that meet just to talk about how things are, to gather together for food, to gather together for social events, so that they can touch base and talk about things that maybe don't have a lot of space within their courses, personal approaches and thoughts and feelings to laugh and to hopefully advise us, right? And to bring back some of that, their reflections and their thoughts, so that we can learn what it is that we're not seeing, what it is that we're not bringing forward, what are barriers that we have missed, and they're able to do that. And then at that deepest level, as far as supporting the transition to the from the pipeline to getting students into that pipeline, right? Bringing students in. We are working with teacher cadet programs to try and recruit students into the program and make sure that the courses that they've taken in high school as concurrent enrollment are given credit, and that they're acknowledged in the university, and that those teachers are supported. So we're reaching out to find those students and bring them in, hopefully to get them trained and bring them back to their own communities to work, which is really the true value of diversifying the workforce, is that grow your own model. And then within our departments and programs, even more specifically, we have done things like having DEI trainings. We have experts within our staff, and so having them provide trainings to the rest of the department or the rest of our program to make sure that everyone has the same language and the same approach and the same thinking and the same expectations around reducing our own biases, around what it means to be a white space, about what it means to support students. So we've done some of that within programs. We've done that intentional focus in our content courses, like the matrix that New shared within our programs, looking at those specific things. Where are they? Where is it embedded in each of those courses? So all of the principles of trauma-informed practices and the framework of trauma-informed practices, are they embedded throughout our courses and not a standalone workshop that students take? We're also looking at equity and social justice standards, and looking at those and examining where are those within our courses, so that comprehensively our students across program can have can say that they have all of these pieces from this framework of training embedded in their coursework and through their teaching. And then we're also specifically within our department, but in other departments too, working on partnerships with specific districts and making sure that those district partners have placements for our students as they place out their placements for our students to do their fields, but then also job offerings. So we're in constant contact back and forth with our district partners in that way. And also, as far as diversifying the teacher workforce, acknowledging specifically in early childhood that that workforce tends to be more diverse, and so supporting those teachers that are out there. So teachers that are already in the workforce, assistants and paras that are already in the workforce, and getting them training through these district partnerships, bringing coursework to them. So we're offering some classes in the district in the evenings after school that teachers can take so that they can advance their own degrees, and they can advance their own learning and knowledge and be better prepared and higher quality placements for our students, so that our students can have jobs in centers that, in schools that are also DEI focused, that are social justice focused, and that are working forward. And again, within that district as well, also working on recruiting from the high schools directly, right? So recruiting students to become those teacher cadets, to do that concurrent enrollment and start moving into the field of education, so that we can diversify the workforce outside of the university. And we'll pass it to Janelle. See if I can move to the next slide.
So at this point, we have a really small group. And so at this point, if you feel comfortable, if you'd be willing to unmute and or put your camera on, we'd love to hear from you all as we move into our next section. Would like to hear who you are and kind of what brings you to this session. Hey, Dan.
Hi, I can go first. I'm Dan
Hey.
Jesse, and I'm from the Western Educational Equity Assistance Center, and we're housed in the School of Education at Metro. And we work with K-12 equity issues for race, sex, national origin, and religion across a 13-state region. Think of going from Montana all the way to New Mexico and everything west, including Hawaii and Alaska and 3 territories.
And so can you talk about this? Is this something you're coaching schools on, or I'm curious?
I can jump in. This
Oh,
is Jan.
Oh, I was gonna
Jan. So I'm Jan Perry-Evanstead, and I'm the executive director of the Western Educational Equity Assistance Center. And one of the things actually the other 3 Equity Assistance Center directors and myself are working on with the U.S. Department of Ed, our little kind of equity group is really looking at doing something around diversifying the teaching workforce as a collaborative project between the 4 centers.
That's exciting.
but we don't know where we're going yet. So I thought maybe I'd get some ideas from you.
That's exciting.
Because it's such a big thing. So we figured, I mean, it gets back down to, it seems like in our discussions we've been having with the Department of Ed, a lot of it at some point in time centers back on to teacher education and teacher prep,
Yeah, you're right. You got to
which
go
we don't
back.
do as a center, but
Right.
we certainly have that connection there. So
Mhm.
yeah, so we're all still kind of trying to figure out what aspect of it all we want to really focus our project on for this coming year.
Nice. We're glad you're here. Is it Eric?
Hey, Arik.
Arik, hi.
Hey, good to be here. I work with Relay Graduate School of Education. And so we're a certification program. We run a residency program in Colorado. We are very committed to diversifying the teacher workforce. We know the importance that it has on students of all colors to have teachers of color at the front of the room. And so we currently have a little more than a third of our candidates identify as people of color, and we're constantly working on how to continue to increase the diversity of our graduate students, of our teacher candidates, both in the, of course, in the attracting them to the profession field, but also very critically in their retention as well, and feeling developed and feeling supported and feeling effective, and supported in managing the workload and everything as well.
Which is a whole nother huge challenge. What can I ask, what is there a certain grade level or band, or?
We work with everything, early childhood to 12th grade, and in most content areas as well.
And where are you based geographically?
So our teachers are in Denver right now, for the most part, and though I mean, we're potentially looking for opportunities to work with teachers elsewhere in the state as well.
Nice.
Or aspiring educators elsewhere.
Excellent. Thank you. Kathy,
Yeah.
what about you, if you're available?
Hi, everybody. Sorry. Nice to meet you. I'm Kathy Whitmore. I'm one of the department chairs in the School of Education at MSU, and came to learn from these three wonderful colleagues, definitely, especially as I'm participating with Dorothy in the putting all of this work into effect in the early childhood program.
Excellent. Thanks for being here.
Sure.
So I'd like to hear from you all. If we look at these two categories at the university level, or whatever kind of scale is appropriate for you all, can you share some things that are either working well or that you're finding as ongoing challenges with diversifying the teacher workforce?
And just to clarify, you're talking about the K-12 teacher workforce, not the faculty.
Correct.
Workforce.
Although that's another issue too. Yes. Yeah, the K-12 teacher workforce.
I mean, I'm happy to start and share some. I mean, Relays, because we're a post-grad program, it might look a little bit different for us. Certainly, the biggest strategy that we've been using is the teacher residency model in general. As like the model itself, I've seen lends itself to supporting the diversification of the teacher workforce, because it allows a much broader pool of candidates from all different backgrounds to be able to kind of test out the profession and learn it on the ground a little bit more, and get that skills and development and everything before moving into a lead teaching role. And so Relay works both in Colorado but in other states as well, and it's consistent across all states that the residency program in particular is where we see our greatest diversity. And then I'll add just another strategy that we've been committed to has also been around financial barriers. and providing scholarships, or some of our folks are eligible for AmeriCorps awards, but basically committing to ways to offset the cost of tuition, which we know is also can be a very critical piece to creating barriers for candidates of color into the profession.
Huge. And part of the way I asked you about the grade level that you all work with. So at MSU Denver, I know at elementary certification, the residency program is up and running successfully. We would like to do it at the secondary level, but we have really struggled with how to do that for a number of reasons. And that's why I put on the state level column for us. Sometimes when I go to these meetings and people talk about, teacher prep, and it's like really thinking about the different models. And I should have added K-12 to this also, because that's another whole ball game, right? But like that we consider the challenges of diversifying within each of these different spheres under teacher prep. I think they can really shape what's happening. So that's great. You all have been able to do the residency model.
And certainly, right. I mean, we see, I think, especially as the content, as the grade level gets higher and content readiness becomes more critical in terms of passing praxis tests, then I think we've found historically that certification exams, can play the role as a more significant barrier, especially as the grade level and content gets more rigorous or more right, just kind of like the more exact.
For sure.
Can I ask a question to the group? Is that okay?
Please.
Question that I have is that recently, about a year ago, one of our students that we lost to a different major said, "I don't think I sound or act like a teacher." How do we get to bring more students, diverse students in, if their perception of teachers are that they have a perception of whether it be whiteness, whether they sound a certain way or look a certain way? I think those are real things that we don't oftentimes discuss, that students are oftentimes not choosing this profession because they don't feel like they look or sound like a teacher. And so I think one thing that we can do better is that when our ear is to the ground, when we're having those conversations with our recruits, right, whether they be high school students or transfer students or students that are in metro areas that we're heading into schools to try to recruit into our profession, what are we saying to students that they need to be or that they need to sound like in order to look and act and be like a teacher? And so you saw my first statement on my syllabus when it said, "I want you to be your authentic self." And that means you don't need to talk like a teacher. You don't need to talk like me in order to be a teacher. You don't need to look like me. And so I think we need to continue to have those conversations and put in the forefront for students when we're recruiting them that you don't need to look like what what is your definition of a teacher? And you don't need to look or sound like that. And so I think I'm becoming more mindful of that and creating more ways to recruit students so that they can see different faces and hear different voices as well, so that they can self-identify themselves and say, "Oh, guess what? You know what? I sound different, I look different, but I'm okay. I can be a teacher too." And I think we need to make sure that we support students and voice for students that we want them to bring their authentic self into our profession.
I can share one promising practice that, so this is a little bit of a cheat because we've done this through supplemental grant funding. So this hasn't been exactly within our teacher prep program, but we have a scholarship for future math and science teachers. And we've seen patterns of debilitating self-doubt among our candidates, like both with content knowledge and pedagogy, right? I'm not ready, I don't know enough. And one thing that happens during our university-based clinical placements is that the students are placed with experienced mentor teachers, which I think is very beneficial in a lot of ways. But at the same time can be sort of intimidating with that feeling ready factor, I think. And so we've started a practice of near peer mentoring, where our candidates go and visit someone very close to them, just ahead of them in their trajectory, so they can really relate to each other. Like, oh, I don't know, I'm still figuring that out too. Or, yeah, I didn't know, but this is what I did, or this is how I'm navigating it. And they have reported to us that they find that very reassuring. And then they also feel like they're not alone and it's not just them. And so that's one thing that I'd be interested in seeing if we can, you know, when we're doing our placements, and I've done this kind of ad hoc, but thinking about placements like a first clinical placement with someone later on, or with a student teacher, you know, so that they have a peer that they can really talk through those things with. I think that could be very helpful. I don't know if anyone has tried anything like that.
That's awesome, Janelle. And are those based on affinity groups or just volunteers from the year before? Or how are you doing that?
So again, we have a captive audience because we're giving them money, and that also makes a difference. This is a NSF Noyce scholarship, but the folks who host, so we ask people to host who are either student teaching, or I mean, all of our folks are either year 1, 2, or 3 teachers. And so we ask for volunteers who'd like to host, and since they've been on the receiving end, they're often happy to host other folks. And so we do math and science, but we really encourage them to go cross disciplinary as well, not just to stay in their content area. So yeah, volunteers within a captive audience.
I think there's a real beauty and possibilities in that, because if it goes from that near peer support to being a tiered support, so that we have third-year teachers and second-year teachers and first-year teachers and student teachers and candidates in a network, we're also building that that support for retention in the field, right? So if we have students of color that we're placing with teachers of color that we're right, they become that network. So diversifying the workforce isn't going to happen overnight. We have to recruit and bring students in. We have to build them and prepare them. We have to get them in the field, and then we have to get them to stay. And I think that near peer model has the potential of becoming that network of diverse teachers new to the field that are working together and building each other up, which will hopefully would help with retention in the long term, because that's a big part of the problem. We don't have a lot of really well-experienced teachers out there that are those great role models for our students, because the workforce isn't diverse enough, right? So, you know, we can't place 25 wonderful teacher candidates with the 3 teachers in the district that they represent, you know. So building that chain, I think, would be really a helpful tool.
That's a great point. Anybody else? It doesn't have to be something similar to that. If something else that you feel like in either of these 2 categories, so sort of policy advocacy, or at the university, or kind of whatever makes sense for you level, that's either worked well or that is really an ongoing wicked problem, as they say.
I think one comment that I have learned just through my own process of, you know, doing what I can as an individual, and then moving through, you know, through every committee I serve on, through my program, through the school, and through the college and above, is that change is sometimes easy individually, but that change can grow faster if it's top down. And I know we always say bottom up, but sometimes to initiate change from higher levels, people are sometimes, you know, forced to follow. And sometimes when we're talking about, you know, diversifying the teacher workforce, or a impetus for social change, right? We sometimes need that to be done at a higher level, whether that be at the state level or whether that be at the university level. Change happens sometimes faster when it is top down. So that I do want to acknowledge.
Well, and this is one thing that I've been dipping my toe into is testifying at the state. And I got to do this in DC also with with a couple senators, and it sort of hit me like, if I'm not talking to these people, how are they developing the understandings of what we need? And so I think we need to really think about being active about telling our students stories to help inform the policy making. And that first point about that they need to be comprehensive, this just came up recently about, so it's like looking at one thing in isolation, but I think we need to help policymakers understand how things are interconnected and can have ripple effects. And so if we're looking at the praxis exam, kind of what are, either, well, or even what is it now, no SAT or ACT coming in, there's some ripple effects. And then, revisiting, so wanting to diversify the teacher workforce, but then do we have the praxis exams or not? And are these things countering each other? And so I think, has anyone done any work that they have found to be effective in terms of connecting with policymakers to hit that top-down piece that New was mentioning? Because we definitely need that. I'll share with you, so when I went to DC, this was, I did not come up with this was facilitated by the grantor, but they helped us make these kind of one pagers with kind of infographics and sort of bullet points, sort of telling our story of outcomes of what we were doing. And I thought that's kind of a smart way, because, certainly not the kind of thing we produce in academia, but when the policymaker or their aide has 5 minutes to look at something, what are they reading over? And yeah, go ahead. I heard someone.
Well, I'll say we actually do a lot of that in ECE, in the early childhood. I mean, you see the things that are happening that are changing in early childhood for the state and across the country. And a lot of it has to do with that heavy lift of policy work and producing one-pagers and talking to the people and getting the information out there in bite-sized pieces to help and support. I think the praxis is a huge barrier and that we need to address that across the state. I also think the expectation of unpaid internship, there's lots of talk across the country, across the state about how important apprenticeship is and how we push students into college and we don't let them go to trade school. And education has always been an apprenticeship model, and it has always been a trade school effectively, because we are training students on the job through their field experiences and then their student teaching, which is an internship. Why the expectation remains that that is an unpaid internship is a huge frustration. We should be leading the way for every other field because we've done it longer and better than anyone else. The problem is now that we have to acknowledge the fact that an unpaid internship is an unreasonable expectation. An unpaid internship on top of paying for praxis exams, on top of paying for licensure. Those are huge barriers that that need to be addressed at a much higher level than putting some statement in my syllabus, right? Like I can do that individual work like you're saying, but if the roadblocks are at the other end, it's a problem.
Yeah, definite gatekeepers.
Yeah, I was
Another-
gonna like co-sign on. Oh, I was just gonna co-sign on everything you said there in terms of work should be paid for. Praxis tests are by far a barrier, show no correlation to effective teaching in any study that I've seen, but just serve to keep people of color in particular out of the field. I'm newer to the Colorado scene. I've been doing a lot of work though over the years in Tennessee, and so I'll share something that I've seen in Tennessee that, and y'all can fill me in if this already exists in Colorado. One of the recent victories in Tennessee was lobbying the State Board of Education to create a policy that requires every school district set a goal and articulate a strategy around teacher diversity. And there's no stick behind that yet. There's nothing that says that if you don't hit your goal that there's any punishment. But the idea is just forcing every district to have a goal to and to be able to put it in public view and add a little peer pressure there around districts to have more ownership over their own strategies for diversifying their teachers.
And in a Colorado context, I'm wondering how that meshes with local control. I think that would have to be done, like you said, sort of an invitation. I think that's one of the, I don't know if anyone has any, I don't think we talked about that, but the local control piece, I think definitely has some influence on how things operate in this state.
I think that's interesting though, because I mean, just to have a mandate like that, even if it's not totally enforceable, it's not requiring any specific approach necessarily, just that you have a plan and publish it. I think, you know, still kind of gives districts and BOCES that local control while saying, look, this is still a statewide issue and we want to look at it. I love all this conversation about top down, and I want you to keep going if you want to, but I was also wondering, though there are absolutely systemic issues that we need to address, teacher pay, paid field experiences, you know, part of the licensure requirements being part of the barriers that we're also trying to address. I'm wondering, I mean, just as this amazing week of all this great information kind of comes to a close, how do we, as a community, also kind of keep this going and make changes from the inside, and how can we at the state support you in that?
I think when we talk about, I think every school, whether it's a K-12 school or university, has a mission, right? And they have there's written goals, like Eric, I'm sorry, is it Eric? Eric had mentioned. And so I think in those plans, if we can do something like a top-down model and have some minimal expectations that say, you know, have it included in your strategic plan, whether that's at the teacher preparation level, whether that's at the local district level, that's pretty simple. You know, let's have some language that it just needs to be included in your strategic plan. And like you said, Brittany, you can go about any way you want to meet those objectives, but it needs to be included somewhere in your strategic plan. For the past about 10 years or so, every 5 years, I do a kind of a longitudinal study, and I look at every school district around the metro area. And so I'm getting ready to do that again this year. So it'll be interesting to compare what those numbers are of the teacher workforce. I compared the teacher workforce with the student population. So I'm interested to see what that growth has been over the last 5 years. So I'm getting ready to do that here this semester. And so that will maybe help inform, at least in my program area and across the state, what we have actually done. We haven't done much explicitly. I haven't been able to find that on districts' websites, other than that they have created oftentimes, resources around that, or they've created a department that deals with, equity and diversity. There's not, like Eric said, there's not a lot of teeth to that. There's not a timeline stated. There's not explicitly goals that have criteria stated for when those things have been met. And so I think that's one real struggle, is that there's no teeth, and there's nothing, they're not held accountable. They're not held personally accountable or not accountable to somebody else. And I think, unfortunately, that's sometimes what happens when there's no accountability. Dorothy, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that the same thing, right? What you asked really, Brittany, is what can we do as a community? And to go back to where New started, right? It starts at the individual level, right? What I can do today and what I can do now to make sure that that message is out there. But it really is for the communities, it's the community's responsibility to go to that accountability level, right? So we have all done a little bit of work. We've all learned a little bit more. We've all read a couple of books. We've all started to grow in these directions, which is not necessarily true of every member of the board, the school board. It's not necessarily true of every member of our society, but as a community, what we can do is hold accountable. And like I said earlier, in every committee that we sit on, and to keep this at the forefront of our minds and to keep pushing those same questions, to keep being the one who always says, gee, you know, that praxis really is just a barrier, and to put ourselves out there, and that's how we make those moves happen. That's how we do it. If we sit back and say, yeah, I attended this session and that's great, and I learned some things that I can do personally, but now I go on and I do these other things. We're all on committees, we're all on boards, we're all doing these different things. We have to be the accountability. So if there are no top-down teeth, we have to be the bottom-up teeth and just persist, right? Just hold each other accountable, hold the schools accountable, hold our teachers accountable, hold the systems that we work with accountable at every opportunity that we can, just by pushing back and asking those questions again and again and again. I think that's an important step.
I do too. And I just have been there's so much value in these conversations this week. I just want to be able to keep them going. So however we can support that, we want to.
I think
I want to
at
share
the CD level, if we can have ongoing, whether they be informal or something formal like this, I think every time we have a meeting that brings people together, like Dorothy said, it's on our forefront, right? And we continue to have those conversations with people that are movers and shakers, right? That hold ourselves accountable, but also have an action plan. So we don't just complain, we create action, right? And so I think that's the important piece, is that what do we do from here after what we've learned today? How do we create action from that? One thing that I would love to propose is that we talked about some of those barriers, but we forgot that there are also barriers for students just trying to access to get to college as well. And so don't forget that whether it's information that they need at the high school level, or whether it's access just to get transportation to a college campus, or just to apply for college, those are some earlier access issues that students might not have, that maybe something at the state level could assist, whether that be a free state day to apply for your local colleges, right? Whether that be a website or a link to show your bus routes to how to get to some of your local colleges, and to offer a free RTD pass. Those are some real barriers that before they even get to praxis time, that the students don't know how to even access information on how to get to college and how to apply and do an application, or how to do a FAFSA form. So just thinking about, where do we start? Maybe that's a good starting point, is displaying what we expect of a teacher. We can all sound different. We can be our authentic self. And then how do we get now those students into our doors? Maybe that's transportation and access to getting a free application and information down at our advisory level at the high school level. And so those are just some of my kind of accumulation of thoughts of kind of what I've learned through this group just in our hour together.
I wanted to share, so like I said, I work with future math and science. I work with a lot of teachers, but I work specifically with future math and science teachers. And we did some data collection on gauging STEM majors' interest in becoming teachers. And we found, especially with first generation students, and that intersects with many students of color, that they see in general teaching as low prestige, and that if they've made it to college, they and their families have, higher aspirations for them in terms of a career outcome, other than becoming a teacher. And so I think that teaching in general has a PR problem in our country, and that's something that we need to work on if we want to engage other people's interests. Some of the students I've worked with have described actually having to kind of fight against their families to pursue their interest of teaching, because it's not becoming a doctor or a lawyer, or those kinds of things. And so I think that it's another prong that needs to be addressed, is just helping to, and I don't know how to do this, but helping to make teaching seen as a more prestigious career could be huge.
Yeah, and I was in one of these convenings earlier this week. I know we're at time and everything here, but we were talking with Annette from Teach Colorado, and they did a little bit of kind of soul searching and things like that for people in the community. And one thing that really struck a lot of candidates was the idea that they were affecting and changing the future. That was like one of the primary things that was really pulling them into the field. So we were trying to think about ways to kind of bring that to the forefront as well too. So definitely hear what you're saying, Janelle. There's a big communication piece that's part of that. That's not just here in Colorado, sure, but that messaging is huge. Yeah. Like I said, we're a little bit over time here, so I'm gonna go ahead and wrap us up. This has been a fantastic conversation, just like all the other ones we've had this week. We're really fortunate to have had you all here. So to Dorothy, to New, to Janelle, thank you so much for being a part of this week. We appreciate you, and as Britt said, whatever we can do to keep these conversations going and to help support all of your work, we're happy to play a part in that as well. So thank you all so much. Please join us this afternoon for our last convening if you can. It'll start at 12:30. It's going to be a fantastic conversation. So thank you all so much. Everybody have a great day.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you.